I was sitting alone in the dim glow of my small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago, the yellowish light from the old desk lamp casting long shadows over the scratched wooden table where my half-eaten bowl of instant ramen sat cooling. The distant crackle and boom of fireworks from the downtown square echoed through the thin walls, the cheerful chaos of New Year's Eve celebrations outside, making the silence inside feel even heavier, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I'd gotten used to being alone. My parents had died young, car accident when I was just a teenager, and the rest of my family was scattered. Distant relatives who sent the occasional holiday card but never bothered to check in. New Year's Eve for me was just another long night to endure. No parties, no toasts, no one to share the countdown with. I cracked open a cheap can of beer from the corner store, figuring I'd take a sip and crash early to sleep through the whole thing. Then, knock knock. The sound jolted me, my heart skipping a beat in surprise. I wasn't expecting anyone. My life was simple. Freelance repair work around the neighborhood, fixing leaks and wiring for whoever called, living paycheck to paycheck in this cramped one-bedroom. No close friends dropping by unannounced, especially not at this hour. I got up, my socked feet padding across the worn linoleum floor, and opened the door. There she was, Elena, the woman from the apartment next door, a good 10 or 15 years older than me. I'd helped her out a few times, unclogging a sink, replacing a flickering light bulb in her hallway, even troubleshooting a faulty outlet during a storm. She always thanked me politely, almost formally, before retreating back into her place, never holding eye contact for more than a second or two, like she was keeping some invisible barrier between us. But tonight, she looked different. Her thick wool coat was buttoned up unevenly, her dark hair tousled and falling loosely around her face, and in her hand she clutched a half-empty glass of red wine, the liquid sloshing slightly as she shifted her weight. Her face was pale under the hallway light, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying. "Hey!" Her voice came out choked, barely above a whisper. Can I come in for a minute? Just for a drink. It's weird being alone right now." I froze, my mind racing. I hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected anyone, let alone her. Before I could respond, she bowed her head slightly, her free hand coming up to wipe at the corner of her eye, where a tear had just escaped. She tried to hide it, that flicker of embarrassment and vulnerability, but it was too late. I'd seen it all. In that split second, something twisted inside me. This woman, who I'd always seen as strong, independent, almost unapproachable, was standing there needing a place to sit, a drink to share, and maybe just someone. My heart ached, not with some sudden rush of romance, but because I knew that feeling all too well. The hollow emptiness of holidays without family. The way the world's joy amplified your own isolation. It was like looking in a mirror, and it hit me harder than I expected. "Come in," I said, my voice rougher than I intended, stepping aside to widen the door. She hesitated for a beat, then nodded and slipped inside. I closed the door behind her, shutting out the distant fireworks, and suddenly the apartment felt smaller, the air thicker with unspoken things. This night, this ordinary, lonely New Year's Eve, had just cracked open into something I couldn't have predicted. Elena shrugged off her coat, hanging it on the hook by the door with trembling hands. She looked around the room, her eyes lingering on the ramen bowl, the scattered tools from my last job, a screwdriver and some wire cutters I'd left out, and the single flickering bulb overhead that I'd been meaning to fix. The place wasn't much. Faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, a secondhand couch sagging in the middle, and a small TV muted on some countdown show from Times Square. It screamed bachelor pad, the kind of spot a 25-year-old like me called home without much thought. "Sorry about the mess," I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck as I cleared space on the table. "Wasn't expecting company." She gave a small, shaky laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's fine. Better than an empty room." I motioned for her to sit on the couch, and she did, still holding her wine glass like a lifeline. I grabbed a clean mug from the cupboard, didn't have fancy stemware, and poured myself a splash from the beer can, then sat across from her on a rickety chair. The silence stretched, broken only by the muffled pops of fireworks outside. I could feel the weight of whatever was eating at her, hanging in the air like smoke. "So, rough night?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice came out softer than I meant. She stared into her glass, swirling the wine absent-mindedly. You could say that? Another pause, then she looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time without darting away. My mom passed away 3 months ago. Heart failure. It was sudden. Too sudden. I nodded slowly, the words sinking in. I hadn't known. We'd been neighbors for over a year, exchanging hellos in the hallway, but our conversations never went deeper than thanks for the help or cold out today, huh? Now, here she was, spilling this raw piece of her life to me, a guy she barely knew. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. That, that sucks. She managed a weak smile. Yeah. Every year we'd do this little ritual, a small dinner, radio on for the countdown. She'd say, no one should ring in the new year alone. It'll curse the whole year with sadness. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she took a quick sip of wine to steady herself. I watched her, feeling that familiar pang in my chest. I get it. My folks died when I was a kid, car crash. Holidays are just reminders, you know? I usually just sleep through them. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the barrier between us thinned. We weren't strangers anymore. We were two people carrying similar scars, sitting in a dimly lit room while the world celebrated outside. The fireworks built to a crescendo, their flashes lighting up the window briefly, but in here it was just us. The quiet confession starting to flow like the wine in her glass. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, she opened up more. About her mom's laugh, the way she'd insist on baking cornbread even though it always burned a little. I shared bits of my own story, growing up in foster care after the accident, bouncing between homes until I aged out, scraping by with odd jobs until I started my repair gigs. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. For the first time in years, New Year's Eve didn't feel like a void. It felt like a bridge. When the countdown hit 0 outside, we raised our drinks in a quiet toast. To not being alone, I said. She clinked her glass against mine. To that. But as the cheers faded, I couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected visit had just shifted something irreversible. The woman I'd seen as distant was now here, vulnerable, and my own walls were cracking too. What started as a simple knock on the door had opened up a night heavy with shared pain. And maybe, just maybe, the start of something more. The fireworks outside were building to their peak, the muffled cheers from distant parties filtering through the walls like a reminder that the world was moving on without us. Elena sat on the couch, her posture a little straighter now, as if forcing herself to hold it together. I could see the effort in the way she gripped her wine glass, her knuckles pale against the stem. Sit wherever, I said, gesturing vaguely as I hurried to clear the table. The place was a mess. Tools from my last gig scattered like forgotten toys, a stack of old newspapers I'd meant to recycle, and that cold coffee mug I'd abandoned hours ago. I shoved it all to one side, feeling self-conscious about the clutter for the first time in ages. This wasn't a space meant for guests, especially not someone like her. She nodded, sinking into the cushions with a soft sigh. I rummaged in the cabinet for a glass, settled on a plain tumbler since I didn't have anything fancy, and poured her a bit more from her own glass to top it off. No point in pretending I had a wine collection. I sat across from her on the edge of the chair, the beer can feeling awkward in my hand now. We didn't speak right away. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly, just heavy like the air before a storm. I took a sip, the fizz biting at my tongue, and watched as she stared into her drink, swirling it slowly. Finally, she lifted her glass. To the new year. A few minutes early. I clinked my can against it gently. Yeah, to that. We drank, the sound of the liquid echoing in the quiet room. Outside, a particularly loud firework whistled and popped, but it felt worlds away. She set her glass down, her fingers lingering on the base, and when she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. A crack in that usual composed facade I'd seen in the hallway. This is the first New Year's I've spent alone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, like she was testing the words out loud for the first time. My mom died 3 months ago, heart issues. Came on so fast. One day she was fine, complaining about the neighbor's dog barking too much, and the next. Her words trailed off and she glanced away toward the window where the city lights flickered faintly through the blinds. I didn't push. I'd learned a long time ago that grief didn't need prompting. It spilled out when it was ready. I'm sorry, I said again, the words feeling inadequate, but what else was there? That sounds rough. She nodded, a small, tight movement. It is. We had this tradition every year, a little spread on the table, radio tuned to the ball drop. She'd always say, no one should face the new year by themselves. It'll set a sad tone for the whole thing. She let out a breathy laugh, but it was edged with pain. Guess I'm breaking that rule tonight. I watched her, the way her shoulders slumped just a fraction, the vulnerability she'd hidden so well now peeking through. It stirred something in me, not pity, but recognition. I know the feeling, I admitted, setting my beer down. My parents died when I was young, car wreck, hit and run on a rainy night. After that, holidays just lost their shine. I'd turn off the lights early, pretend it was any other day. Her eyes met mine then, really met them, without that quick aversion she usually had. How old were you? 13. Bounced around foster homes until I turned 18, then struck out on my own. Been piecing it together ever since. I shrugged, trying to play it off like it was no big deal, but saying it out loud always brought back that dull ache. She leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. That's a lot to carry alone. We fell into talking after that, not the surface stuff like weather or building maintenance, but real things. She shared more about her mom, the way she'd insist on baking cornbread from scratch, even if it came out a little charred every time, or how they'd sit up late listening to old jazz records her mom had collected over the years. I told her about the small rituals I'd hung on to from my parents, a recipe for chili my dad used to make on cold nights, or the beat-up toolbox my mom had given me, saying I'd always be the fixer in the family. As the minutes ticked by, the conversation shifted. I mentioned my dream of opening a small woodworking shop someday, turning scrap wood from job sites into furniture. Nothing fancy, just functional pieces people could use. It's stupid, maybe, I said, but I like the idea of making something lasting out of junk. Not stupid at all, she replied, her voice warmer now. I used to wander into old bookstores downtown just to lose myself in the stacks. It was my escape after a bad day at the office. Still is sometimes. We talked about those little escapes, the things that kept us going when the weight got too heavy. The fireworks outside reached their frenzy, the new year bursting in with light and noise, but in here, it was just the two of us, the barriers crumbling bit by bit. For the first time, I saw her smile. A real one, not the polite nod I'd gotten before. It lit up her face, chasing away some of the shadows, and in that moment, the room felt less empty. It was like we'd found a shared rhythm, two people who'd been orbiting the same loneliness finally colliding. As the echoes of the celebrations faded, I realized this night wasn't just about surviving the holiday anymore. It was the start of something quiet, something real. From that New Year's Eve onward, my apartment started to feel a little less empty, like some invisible warmth had seeped in through the shared wall between our units. It wasn't dramatic, no grand declarations or sudden changes, but small things began to shift. A few days after the holiday, my phone buzzed with a text from her. Do you have a flathead screwdriver? My door lock's sticking. I grabbed my toolkit and headed over. It was a quick fix, nothing more than a loose screw and some lubricant, but while I worked, she hovered in the doorway, chatting about the cold snap hitting the city. When I finished, she handed me a small Tupperware container. I made lentil soup yesterday. Figured you might want some. It's my mom's old recipe. I took it, surprised. Thanks, smells good. After that, the messages trickled in more often, little excuses that blurred into something warmer. I tried making that cornbread, turned out burnt but edible. Want to judge? Or, could you help me hang this shelf? It's wobbling. Or even, that song you mentioned last time? I looked it up, it's stuck in my head now. We didn't label it, didn't talk about what it meant. It just grew like light spilling from one room to another through a cracked door. I'd knock on her door with a tool in hand and we'd end up talking for hours. About books she'd found in dusty shops or my half-baked plans for that woodworking shop. The wall between us, both literal and figurative, thinned out with each visit. But then, abruptly, she vanished. It started with 3 days of silence. No sounds from her side, no footsteps in the hall, no faint hum of her TV through the walls. Her door stayed shut tight. Text went unread, stacking up in my phone. Hey, everything okay? Need help with anything? Nothing. I knocked once, twice, waited in the hallway for nearly an hour, my mind racing with worry. Was she sick? Had something happened? Finally, I trudged back to my place, the quiet gnawing at me like a bad tooth. By the fourth day, the unease had turned into a knot in my stomach. I paced my kitchen, replaying our last conversation, a casual chat about weekend plans over leftover soup. Nothing seemed off, but the silence screamed otherwise. I grabbed my keys and knocked again, louder this time. After what felt like forever, the door creaked open just a sliver. There she was, looking like a shadow of herself. Pale face, tangled hair, eyes avoiding mine like they held some accusation. Where have you been? I blurted, my voice sharper than I intended, laced with the frustration I'd bottled up. She glanced down, her hand gripping the doorframe. I went to see an old friend. The words hit like a punch. Old friend? Like an ex? She didn't nod, but she didn't deny it either. Something like that. I stood there, frozen, my chest tightening as if the air had been sucked out of the hallway. So, you're getting back with him? She shook her head, but there was no relief in her expression, just a weary resignation. No, but it made me realize, I can't do this. Pull you into my mess. You're young, Ryan. You should be out there with someone your age, building a life without baggage. I don't want to be the one you settle for temporarily. And I sure as hell don't want you pitying me because I'm alone. Her words stung, slicing through the fragile connection we'd built. I clenched my fists, a rush of anger and hurt bubbling up. Pity? That's what you think this is? I didn't ask you in that night out of pity. And I sure didn't keep coming back because I felt sorry for you. She looked away, her voice barely audible. Maybe not, but I'm older. I've got scars you don't need to deal with. Us, it's not fair to you. I wanted to argue, to yell that she was wrong, that age didn't matter, that what we had felt real, but the words stuck in my throat. Deep down, I saw the pain in her eyes, the fear of being a burden, of repeating old mistakes. She was pushing me away not because she didn't care, but because she did, in her own twisted way. It hurt like hell, that realization, like a raw wound exposed to the air. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling cracks, the silence from next door deafening. No light seeped under her door, no texts lit up my phone. The apartment felt colder than ever, the echoes of our conversations mocking me. For the first time, this young heart of mine truly ached. Not just from loneliness, but from the fear of losing someone who'd started to fill the voids I didn't even know I had. And worse, not knowing how to bridge the gap she'd just widened. That afternoon, the sky opened up with a sudden downpour, the rain coming down in relentless sheets that turned the streets outside into slick mirrors reflecting the gray Chicago skyline. It matched the heaviness I'd been carrying all week, that knot of worry and frustration twisting tighter with every unanswered text and silent door. I was in my makeshift workshop in the back corner of the apartment, really just a cluttered table with scraps of wood I'd scavenged from job sites, absent-mindedly sanding down a piece of oak, my mind miles away when I heard it. A soft, hesitant knock. My heart jumped. I set the sandpaper down, wiping my hands on my jeans, and crossed to the door. When I opened it, there she was. Elena, standing in the hallway, her hair plastered to her face from the rain, her coat dripping puddles onto the doormat. Her eyes were red again, but this time it wasn't from crying. It was from whatever storm she'd been weathering inside. She looked small, uncertain, like she was bracing for rejection. I didn't see my ex, she started, her voice trembling as she stepped just inside the threshold, not quite committing to entering. I went to a place we used to go, sat there for hours, just to make sure there was nothing left to hold on to, no loose ends I hadn't tied up. I stood there, silent, processing her words. The anger from before melted into confusion, then relief. But it was mixed with that same ache. Why didn't you say anything? Why disappear like that? She looked down, water dripping from her sleeves. Because I realized how scared I am. You're not some young guy I need to push away. You're the one I'm afraid I'll hurt if I let myself believe in this again. Her voice cracked, and she met my eyes, raw and unguarded for the first time. The age thing, my past, it's all baggage. I don't want to drag you down with it. The words hung between us, heavy with her fears. I could see it all in her face. The divorces she'd hinted at before. The loneliness she'd carried even longer than her mom's illness. She was protecting me, or trying to, by building walls around herself. But in that moment, staring at her soaked and vulnerable, I didn't see baggage. I saw someone who'd been strong for too long, someone who deserved to lean on another person without apology. I didn't argue, didn't launch into some speech about how age didn't matter, or how I wasn't scared. Instead, I reached out, my hand closing gently around hers, cold and trembling from the rain. "Come in," I said softly, pulling her inside and shutting the door behind us. She didn't resist. I helped her out of her wet coat, hanging it up to drip dry, and led her to the couch. The rain hammered against the windows, a steady drum that filled the room as I grabbed a towel from the bathroom and draped it over her shoulders. She sat there, shivering slightly, and I knelt in front of her for a second, rubbing her arms to warm her up. No words, just that simple act of care, the kind we'd both been missing for so long. We didn't go to bed that night. Instead, we ended up on the couch, sharing a threadbare blanket I'd pulled from the closet. I dug out my phone and scrolled back to a video I'd taken last New Year's Eve, from my fire escape, capturing the fireworks bursting over the city skyline. It was shaky, amateur footage, but it held that moment when she'd first knocked, the distant booms syncing with the memory of her standing there with her wine glass. We watched it in silence at first, the colors flashing across the screen. Then she leaned her head against my shoulder, her body relaxing into mine. I tilted my head slightly, resting it against her damp hair. The scent of rain and her shampoo filled the air, grounding me. No questions about the future, no demands for explanations. Just us, in that quiet space where the misunderstandings had finally cracked open. As the video looped, the fireworks exploding again and again, she whispered, "I thought pushing you away would make it easier, but it just hurt more." I squeezed her hand under the blanket. "I get it, but you don't have to do everything alone anymore." The rain eased up sometime after midnight, tapering to a soft patter. We talked in low voices about the little things, the way her mom's death had left her unmoored, how my parents' accident had made me wary of getting close to anyone. But woven in were the lighter threads, her love for wandering bookstores, my tinkering with wood scraps. It felt like healing, slow and tentative, each confession pulling us closer. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside washed clean. She stayed curled against me, her breathing steady and even. For the first time, the silence wasn't empty, it was full, warm, like a promise we didn't need to voice. We'd cross through the misunderstandings, the pain, and come out the other side, not fixed, but mending together. 1 year slipped by, quiet and steady, like the changing seasons outside our building on the edge of Chicago. My apartment hadn't transformed into some glossy magazine spread. It was still the same small space with its scratched table, sagging couch, and that flickering light I'd finally gotten around to fixing. But little things had changed. The front stoop now had a couple of flower beds Elena had planted last spring, wild blooms pushing through the cracks in the concrete, and a wind chime she'd hung by the door that tinkled softly whenever a breeze swept in from the lake nearby. It made the place feel lived in, shared, like it wasn't just mine anymore. I stood in the kitchen that evening, my hands fumbling with a small box I'd wrapped in plain brown paper. Nothing fancy, just what I could manage with my clumsy fingers. Gift wrapping wasn't my strong suit. I was better with tools and wood scraps. But this was different. Inside was a simple glass wine tumbler I'd picked up from a thrift shop downtown, clear, unadorned, the kind that felt right for us. Tucked beside it was a handwritten card, my scrawl a bit uneven but honest. "This time, I'm the one inviting you, one glass. Not because you're alone, but because I want to be the one popping the cork with you every year for the rest of them." My heart thumped as I tied the ribbon, replaying the year in my mind. It hadn't been all smooth. There were days when her grief hit hard, pulling her into silence, or when my own doubts about our age gap crept in, whispering that this couldn't last. We'd argued once or twice. Small things like me working too late or her pulling away when memories overwhelmed her. But we'd always come back, talking it out over coffee or walks by the lake, learning to navigate the rough patches together. She'd taught me patience. I'd shown her it was okay to lean on someone without fear. The clock on the wall ticked toward 11:59, the distant hum of the city gearing up for another New Year's Eve filtering through the windows. I heard her footsteps in the hall before the soft knock, our signal now, familiar and comforting. When I opened the door, there she was, her hair a little longer than last year, falling in soft waves around her face. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, but her eyes held that new softness I'd come to love, a quiet trust that hadn't been there before. "Hey," she said, stepping inside with a small smile. "Smells like you're cooking something." "Just heating up some soup," I replied, closing the door behind her, but my mind was on the box. We moved to the living room, the wind chimes singing faintly as a gust rattled the panes. The TV was on low, showing the ball drop in Times Square, but neither of us paid it much attention. I handed her the box after we sat down. "For you, nothing big?" She raised an eyebrow, curious, and carefully unwrapped it. When she lifted the lid and saw the glass, then unfolded the card, her fingers paused. She read the words slowly, her expression shifting from surprise to something deeper, her eyes glistening. No words came at first, just a single tear slipping down her cheek, not from sorrow this time, but from gratitude, from the kind of relief that comes after carrying a weight too long. She set the card down gently, her hand trembling a bit as she traced the edge of the glass. "Ryan," she whispered, looking up at me. This means everything." Outside, the fireworks began their ritual explosion, bursts of color lighting up the night sky over the city. Cheers echoed from the streets below, car horns blaring in celebration. But in our little apartment, it was just the two of us, shoulder to shoulder on the couch, no need for the spectacle. I poured a splash of wine into her new glass and my old mug, and we clinked them together softly. "To us," I said. She nodded, her voice steady but full. "To not turning away." We sipped in comfortable silence, the warmth of the drink mirroring the one building between us. The year had healed us in ways we hadn't expected, her grief softening around the edges, my isolation fading into companionship. We'd taken trips to the lakefront, shared lazy Sundays with books and coffee, even started a small herb garden on her balcony that spilled over into mine. It wasn't perfect. Life never is. But it was ours, built from that one knock on a lonely night. As the echoes of the fireworks died down, she leaned her head on my shoulder and I rested mine against hers. No grand promises, no rush toward forever. Just the quiet certainty that we'd found each other at the right time. "We didn't come together for the big things," I murmured, echoing a thought we'd shared before. She finished it, her hand finding mine. "We came together because in our loneliest moment you didn't turn away. You opened the door,